The pre-dawn darkness stretched across the Afghan mountains like a heavy blanket, broken only by scattered stars that seemed to watch the unfolding drama below. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his night vision goggles and checked his rifle for the third time in 10 minutes. His hands moved with the practiced precision of a man who had performed these same motions hundreds of times before. But tonight felt different. Tonight carried the weight of something bigger than their usual reconnaissance missions. Rodriguez led Alpha Squad, a 6-man SEAL team that had been operating in the Helmand province for the past 4 months. They had earned their reputation through a series of successful raids against Taliban strongholds, but this mission represented their most challenging assignment yet. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target had taken refuge in a compound nestled deep within the mountainous terrain, approximately 15 kilometers from their current position. The team had been inserted by helicopter at 200 hours, landing in a valley that provided natural concealment from enemy observation posts. The pilot had kept the aircraft low, skimming just above the rocky terrain to avoid detection by radar systems that the Taliban had recently acquired from unknown sources. As the helicopter disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind only the fading sound of rotor blades, the 6 SEALs found themselves alone in hostile territory, with nothing but their training, equipment, and each other. Petty Officer First Class Danny Thompson crouched beside Rodriguez, studying a detailed topographical map through his night vision scope. Thompson had joined the team 8 months earlier, fresh from completing his advanced sniper training at the Naval Special Warfare Center. His lean frame and quiet demeanor masked a deadly accuracy that had already saved the team on 2 previous missions. He traced their planned route with his finger, noting potential choke points and areas where they might encounter enemy patrols. The compound they needed to reach sat on a ridge that offered commanding views of the surrounding valleys. According to satellite imagery, the structure appeared to be a traditional Afghan dwelling that had been significantly fortified over recent months. Intelligence analysts had identified multiple defensive positions, including what appeared to be heavy machine gun emplacements and possibly anti-aircraft weapons. The presence of these defensive measures suggested that whoever occupied the compound considered it worth defending. Chief Petty Officer William Hayes, the team's communications specialist, made final adjustments to his radio equipment. Hayes had served with Naval Special Warfare for over 12 years, and his experience showed in the way he anticipated problems before they occurred. He established contact with their operations center, confirming that air support remained on standby should the situation deteriorate. The reassuring voice of their controller crackled through his earpiece, providing weather updates and confirming that satellite coverage would be available throughout their mission. Petty Officer Second Class Miguel Santos checked the team's medical supplies one final time. As their corpsman, Santos carried the responsibility of keeping his teammates alive if things went wrong. His pack contained everything from basic first aid supplies to emergency surgical instruments, all organized with the methodical precision that had earned him recognition as one of the finest combat medics in the Navy. Santos had saved lives under fire before, and his presence provided the team with confidence that they would return home regardless of what challenges lay ahead. The youngest member of the team, Petty Officer Third Class Jake Morrison, performed a final systems check on their demolitions equipment. Morrison had earned his place on the team through exceptional performance during training, but this marked only his second operational deployment. His nervous energy was barely contained as he verified the functionality of each piece of electronic equipment they carried. The other team members had noticed his anxiety, but they also recognized the dedication and skill that had brought him to their unit. Rounding out the team was Petty Officer Second Class Kevin Park, their intelligence analyst and language specialist. Park spoke fluent Dari and Pashto, skills that had proven invaluable during previous missions. His ability to intercept and translate enemy communications had prevented several ambushes, and his cultural knowledge helped the team navigate the complex social dynamics of the region. Park monitored radio frequencies as the team prepared to move, listening for any indication that their presence had been detected. Rodriguez gathered his team for a final briefing, speaking in whispers that barely carried beyond their small circle. The mission parameters were straightforward but dangerous. They needed to conduct surveillance of the compound, confirm the presence of their target, and call in an airstrike if the opportunity presented itself. The simplicity of the plan belied its inherent risks, as they would be operating without immediate backup in an area known to contain significant enemy forces. The terrain between their insertion point and the target compound presented numerous challenges. The route required crossing 2 ridge lines while avoiding known patrol routes and observation posts. Intelligence reports suggested that enemy forces conducted regular patrols throughout the area, particularly during the hours just before dawn. The team would need to move quickly and silently, using natural terrain features to mask their movement while remaining alert for signs of enemy activity. As they prepared to begin their movement, Rodriguez reflected on the intelligence briefing they had received 24 hours earlier. The target represented a significant figure within the Taliban leadership structure, someone whose capture or elimination could disrupt enemy operations throughout the province. However, the intelligence also suggested that the compound might contain civilian family members, adding complexity to any potential engagement. The rules of engagement were clear, but the reality of making split-second decisions under fire often proved more challenging than training scenarios suggested. Thompson took point as the team began their movement. His sniper rifle ready and his eyes constantly scanning the terrain ahead. His job involved identifying potential threats before they could threaten the team, and his training had taught him to notice subtle signs that others might miss. The way shadows fell across the landscape, the presence or absence of local wildlife, and even changes in wind direction could all provide valuable intelligence about enemy presence in the area. The team moved in a tactical formation that maximized their ability to respond to contact from any direction while minimizing their visibility to potential observers. Each man maintained visual contact with the teammates immediately in front of and behind him, using hand signals to communicate when radio silence was essential. Their movements were deliberate and controlled, with frequent pauses to listen for sounds that might indicate enemy presence. After 90 minutes of careful movement, the team reached their first checkpoint, a small cluster of rocks that provided temporary concealment while they assessed their progress. Rodriguez checked his GPS coordinates and confirmed that they remained on schedule despite the challenging terrain. The temperature had dropped significantly since their insertion, and condensation began forming on their equipment despite the arid climate. Each team member took the opportunity to hydrate and adjust their gear before continuing the approach to their target. Hayes monitored multiple radio frequencies during their brief halt, listening for enemy communications that might indicate their presence had been detected. The radio traffic remained routine, consisting mainly of scheduled check-ins between patrol units and their command centers. However, Hayes noticed an increase in activity on frequencies typically used by Taliban commanders, suggesting that something significant might be developing in their area of operations. The second phase of their movement required crossing an open valley that offered little natural concealment. Satellite imagery had identified this area as a potential choke point, but no alternative route existed that would allow them to reach their objective within the required time frame. Rodriguez made the decision to cross the valley in 2-man teams, with each pair providing overwatch for the next while maintaining radio contact throughout the movement. Thompson and Morrison crossed first, moving quickly but carefully across the exposed terrain, while the remainder of the team provided security from elevated positions. Their crossing took nearly 30 minutes as they navigated around scattered boulders and occasional patches of vegetation that might provide concealment to enemy observers. Once they reached the far side of the valley, they established overwatch positions and signaled for the next pair to begin their movement. Santos and Park made the second crossing, using a slightly different route to avoid establishing a predictable pattern that enemy forces might exploit. Their medical and communications equipment added weight to their movement, but both men had trained extensively for these conditions and completed their crossing without incident. The final pair, consisting of Rodriguez and Hayes, waited until the first 4 team members had established security positions before beginning their own movement across the exposed terrain. As dawn approached, the team found themselves within 2 kilometers of their target compound. The increasing light presented both opportunities and dangers, as improved visibility would aid their surveillance efforts while simultaneously making their own presence more detectable to enemy forces. Rodriguez decided to establish a temporary observation post in a cluster of rocks that offered good views of the target while providing adequate concealment for his team. The compound appeared exactly as described in their intelligence briefing, with high walls surrounding several buildings and clear evidence of recent fortification efforts. Thompson studied the structure through his high-powered scope, noting the positions of guards and the locations of defensive emplacements. He counted at least 12 individuals moving within the compound, including several who appeared to be carrying automatic weapons and wearing tactical gear that suggested military training. Hayes established communication with their air support, confirming that attack aircraft remained on station and ready to respond if called upon. The presence of close air support provided the team with options should their surveillance mission evolve into something requiring immediate firepower. However, Rodriguez preferred to complete their primary objective without revealing their presence, as successful intelligence gathering often proved more valuable than immediate tactical actions. As the sun rose higher above the mountain peaks, the team settled into their observation routine. They would remain in position throughout the day, documenting enemy activities and waiting for confirmation that their primary target was indeed present within the compound. The waiting represented one of the most challenging aspects of their profession, requiring patience and discipline while maintaining constant readiness for immediate action. Morrison monitored the team's electronic surveillance equipment, which had detected multiple cell phone signals and radio transmissions emanating from the compound. The communications suggested a significant level of activity, with frequent contacts between the compound and other locations throughout the region. Park listened to radio intercepts, translating conversations that provided valuable intelligence about enemy plans and capabilities. The morning passed slowly as the team maintained their observation of the target compound. They documented the movements of personnel, identified defensive positions, and noted the arrival of several vehicles that suggested important meetings might be taking place. Rodriguez began to believe that their intelligence had been accurate and that they were indeed observing a significant enemy leadership gathering. However, as midday approached, the situation began to change in ways that none of them had anticipated. Thompson noticed increased activity on the surrounding ridgelines, with what appeared to be armed groups moving into positions that would allow them to observe or potentially attack their location. The realization dawned slowly but certainly that their own presence might have been detected, and that they were potentially walking into a carefully prepared trap. Thompson's voice crackled through the team's communication system with controlled urgency that immediately caught everyone's attention. Through his sniper scope, he had identified at least 3 separate groups of armed individuals moving along the ridgelines that surrounded their observation post. The movements appeared coordinated, suggesting a level of tactical planning that went beyond coincidental patrol activities. Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten as he realized that their carefully planned surveillance mission was rapidly evolving into something far more dangerous. The team had been conducting observation of the target compound for nearly 6 hours when the first signs of trouble appeared. What had initially seemed like routine enemy patrol activity gradually revealed itself as something much more sophisticated. Hayes intercepted radio communications, indicating that Taliban forces had been aware of their presence for several hours and had been carefully maneuvering additional fighters into position to surround the American team. The enemy had demonstrated patience and tactical discipline that surprised even these experienced special operations personnel. Rodriguez immediately began calculating their options, none of which looked particularly promising. Their observation post, while offering excellent views of the target compound, also left them exposed to attack from multiple directions. The rocky outcropping that had provided concealment during their surveillance now threatened to become their tomb if enemy forces succeeded in establishing fire superiority from the surrounding high ground. The nearest suitable landing zone for helicopter extraction lay more than 3 kilometers away across terrain that would be swept by enemy fire if they attempted to move during daylight hours. Santos quickly assessed their ammunition and medical supplies, reporting quantities that would sustain them through a brief firefight, but certainly not through an extended siege. Each team member carried approximately 300 rounds for their primary weapons, plus additional ammunition for sidearms and grenades. Under normal circumstances, this represented adequate firepower for their mission parameters, but their current situation demanded resources they simply did not possess. The reality of their tactical disadvantage became increasingly apparent as enemy positions continued to develop around their location. Park monitored enemy radio frequencies with growing concern as he translated communications that revealed the scope of the trap they had walked into. Taliban commanders were coordinating the movements of more than 40 fighters, including several teams equipped with heavy weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. The enemy forces had been planning this ambush for days, using intelligence sources that allowed them to anticipate the American team's arrival and prepare accordingly. The sophistication of the enemy planning suggested involvement from individuals with significant military training and experience. Morrison worked frantically to establish communication with friendly forces that might be able to provide assistance, but their remote location limited their options. The nearest American military base lay more than 60 kilometers away, well beyond the range of ground-based artillery or immediate reinforcement. Their only hope for external support came from aircraft that could reach their location within reasonable time frames. But even close air support would face significant challenges in the mountainous terrain that limited maneuverability and complicated target identification. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the temperature within their rocky shelter became nearly unbearable. The combination of stress, physical discomfort, and tactical disadvantage began to wear on the team's morale despite their extensive training and experience. Rodriguez recognized the signs of mounting pressure on his men and made deliberate efforts to maintain their focus and confidence. Leadership in special operations often required projecting calm authority, even when facing seemingly impossible odds. The first enemy shots came without warning, striking the rocks near Thompson's position and sending fragments flying in all directions. The sniper immediately identified the source of the fire and returned several well-placed shots that silenced the enemy position temporarily. However, his actions also revealed their exact location to other enemy forces, triggering a coordinated assault from multiple directions that tested every aspect of their training and equipment. Hayes called for immediate close air support while simultaneously trying to coordinate with their operations center regarding evacuation options. The response he received provided little encouragement, as weather conditions had deteriorated around potential aircraft launch points, delaying the arrival of support aircraft by at least 90 minutes. The team would need to survive on their own resources until help could arrive, a prospect that seemed increasingly unlikely as enemy fire intensified from positions that commanded every possible escape route. Santos treated Morrison's wounds after shrapnel from an enemy grenade lacerated the young sailor's left arm and shoulder. The injuries were not life-threatening, but they reduced Morrison's effectiveness as a combatant and added urgency to their need for evacuation. Santos worked quickly to stop the bleeding and administer pain medication, while enemy bullets continued to strike the rocks around their position. His medical training had prepared him for treating wounds under fire, but the reality proved more challenging than any simulation. The enemy assault demonstrated tactical sophistication that surprised even these experienced operators. Taliban forces employed coordinated fire and movement techniques while maintaining disciplined communication procedures that prevented the Americans from gaining intelligence about enemy intentions through radio intercepts. The attacking forces also demonstrated excellent marksmanship and an understanding of small unit tactics that suggested training from professional military instructors. Rodriguez realized that their only chance for survival lay in breaking contact with the enemy forces and moving to a more defensible position before their ammunition ran out. However, any movement would expose them to concentrated fire from multiple directions, and they would need to carry Morrison despite his wounds. The decision to move represented a calculated risk that balanced certain death from remaining in place against probable casualties during movement to a better position. Thompson provided covering fire, while the remainder of the team prepared to bound to a secondary position approximately 50 meters away. His accurate shooting temporarily suppressed enemy positions, but he knew that his concealment would be compromised once he began moving with his teammates. The sniper's sacrifice of his protected position demonstrated the selfless dedication that characterized special operations personnel, but it also reduced their overall combat effectiveness at a critical moment. The team's movement to their secondary position came under intense fire that wounded Hayes and forced them to take shelter behind inadequate cover that offered limited protection from enemy rounds. Hayes had taken a bullet through his left thigh that caused significant bleeding, but had missed major arteries and bone structures. Santos worked to treat both wounded team members, while Rodriguez and the others tried to establish a defensive perimeter that could withstand the continuing enemy assault. Park maintained communication with their operations center while translating enemy radio traffic that revealed the Taliban forces were preparing for a final assault designed to overrun their position. The enemy commanders had demonstrated remarkable patience in developing their attack, but they apparently planned to conclude the engagement before American reinforcements could arrive. The knowledge that time was working against them added pressure to an already desperate situation. The enemy's final assault began with a coordinated barrage of rocket-propelled grenades that shattered rocks around the American position and filled the air with deadly fragments. Rodriguez counted at least 20 enemy fighters advancing from 3 different directions, using fire and movement techniques that maximized their numerical advantage while minimizing their exposure to American defensive fire. The professionalism of the enemy assault impressed him even as he fought desperately to save his team. Thompson's sniper rifle ran out of ammunition during the height of the enemy assault, forcing him to transition to his sidearm and grenades as enemy fighters closed within 50 meters of their position. His accurate long-range shooting had been their primary advantage during the early phases of the engagement, and its loss significantly reduced their ability to control the enemy's movements. The sniper had accounted for at least 8 enemy casualties, but his efforts had not been sufficient to break up their coordinated attack. Santos ran out of medical supplies while treating Hayes's wounds, leaving him unable to properly address additional casualties that seemed inevitable as enemy forces continued their advance. The corpsmen had performed miracles in keeping Morrison and Hayes functional despite their wounds, but he could only work with the resources available. The shortage of medical supplies represented another critical factor in their deteriorating tactical situation. Rodriguez made the decision to call for danger-close air support, knowing that their position was so compromised that friendly fire represented an acceptable risk compared to certain death from enemy assault. Hayes transmitted their exact coordinates, along with the locations of enemy forces, requesting immediate strikes on positions within 100 meters of their location. The request represented a desperate gamble that reflected the hopelessness of their tactical situation. The response from their air controller provided the first encouraging news they had received in hours. An A-10 Thunderbolt aircraft had just arrived on station and was preparing to engage enemy positions around their location. The pilot had been monitoring their radio traffic during her approach and understood the critical nature of their situation. Rodriguez felt a surge of hope as he realized that salvation might be approaching in the form of the distinctive twin-engine attack aircraft. Park continued monitoring enemy radio frequencies and reported that Taliban commanders were urging their fighters to complete their assault quickly before American aircraft could intervene. The enemy forces had apparently not detected the approaching A-10, but they understood that their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Their urgency to finish the engagement worked in favor of the surrounded Americans, as it forced the Taliban fighters to expose themselves to air attack. Thompson spotted the distinctive silhouette of the A-10 aircraft approaching from the northeast, flying low between the mountain peaks in a manner that concealed its presence from enemy forces until the last possible moment. The pilot had chosen her approach route carefully, using terrain masking to achieve tactical surprise while positioning herself for effective engagement of enemy positions. The sight of the aircraft filled the surrounded SEALs with hope that they might survive their desperate situation. Morrison managed to establish visual contact with the A-10 pilot despite his wounds, using his mirror to flash signals that confirmed their position and helped her distinguish friendly forces from enemy fighters. His efforts proved critical in ensuring that the pilot could engage enemy positions without risking fratricide in the confused tactical situation. The young sailor's actions demonstrated courage and professionalism that had earned him his place on the Special Operations team. The sound of the A-10's GAU-8 cannon filled the mountain valley with a distinctive roar that struck fear into enemy forces while providing hope to the surrounded Americans. Rodriguez watched in amazement as the pilot's accurate fire shattered enemy positions and sent Taliban fighters scrambling for cover. The aircraft's arrival had fundamentally changed the tactical situation, but the outcome remained uncertain as enemy forces attempted to adapt to this new threat. Captain Sarah Mitchell had been flying combat missions in her A-10 Thunderbolt for 18 months, but nothing had prepared her for the desperation she heard in the radio transmissions from the surrounded SEAL team. The 29-year-old pilot from Colorado had earned her reputation through precision strikes that saved American lives while minimizing collateral damage. But this mission demanded split-second decisions that would determine whether 6 Special Operations personnel lived or died. As she approached the mountain valley, Mitchell could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions that indicated the intensity of the firefight below. Her aircraft carried a full load of ammunition for the GAU-8 cannon, along with Maverick missiles and cluster bombs that could devastate enemy positions if used correctly. However, the close proximity of friendly forces to enemy positions meant that Mitchell would need to employ her weapons with surgical precision to avoid causing casualties among the Americans she was trying to save. The margin for error in danger-close air support was measured in meters, and mistakes resulted in dead friendlies rather than grateful survivors. Mitchell established radio contact with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez as she began her first attack run, requesting immediate confirmation of friendly positions before engaging enemy forces. The SEAL team leader's voice carried the strain of prolonged combat, but his tactical descriptions were clear and precise despite the chaos surrounding his position. Rodriguez guided her attention to the most threatening enemy positions while providing continuous updates on his team's status and ammunition situation. The pilot's first strafing run with her GAU-8 cannon targeted a Taliban machine gun position that had been preventing the SEALs from moving to better cover. Mitchell's 30mm shells shredded the rocky outcropping where enemy fighters had established their weapons, sending fragments and bodies flying in all directions. The distinctive sound of her cannon fire echoed through the mountain valley, announcing to every combatant that air support had finally arrived on scene. Enemy forces immediately began targeting Mitchell's aircraft with small arms fire and rocket-propelled grenades, forcing her to maneuver aggressively to avoid being shot down. The A-10's armor protection allowed her to absorb several hits that would have destroyed lighter aircraft, but she knew that sustained enemy fire could eventually find critical components that would end her mission. Taliban fighters had received training on engaging American aircraft, and their discipline under air attack impressed her despite their status as adversaries. Rodriguez coordinated the movements of his team, while Mitchell engaged enemy positions, taking advantage of the tactical opportunities created by her accurate fire. The SEALs bounded from their compromised position to better cover, while Taliban fighters focused their attention on the attacking aircraft rather than the ground targets. Hayes and Morrison moved despite their wounds, demonstrating the warrior ethos that drove special operations personnel to fight effectively even when seriously injured. Thompson re-established his sniper position during Mitchell's second attack run, which targeted a concentration of enemy fighters who had been preparing to assault the American ground position. The pilot's cluster bombs devastated the Taliban formation, while creating sufficient confusion to allow Thompson to engage individual targets with his sidearm. His marksmanship skills proved effective even with a pistol, adding to the casualties inflicted by Mitchell's airstrikes. Santos continued treating his wounded teammates while coordinating with Mitchell regarding potential landing zones for medical evacuation helicopters. The corpsman's assessment indicated that Hayes and Morrison needed immediate surgical attention that exceeded his field capabilities, but their wounds were not immediately life-threatening if they could receive proper care within the next few hours. The arrival of air support had stabilized their tactical situation, but medical considerations added urgency to their need for extraction. Park monitored enemy radio communications and reported to Mitchell that Taliban commanders were calling for reinforcements while attempting to coordinate anti-aircraft fire that could threaten her continued operations. The enemy forces had demonstrated remarkable resilience despite suffering heavy casualties, and they continued attempting to complete their mission even as Mitchell's attacks disrupted their tactical coordination. Their persistence suggested that the target in the original compound represented significant value to Taliban leadership. Mitchell's third attack run employed precision Maverick missiles against enemy positions that were too close to friendly forces for cannon fire. Her targeting systems allowed her to guide each missile to its intended target while minimizing the blast effects that could injure the surrounded SEALs. The missiles eliminated several enemy positions simultaneously, creating gaps in the Taliban encirclement that the American ground team could potentially exploit for movement to safety. Rodriguez made the decision to move his team toward a potential extraction site while Mitchell provided overwatch from above. The pilot coordinated with helicopter crews that were approaching the area, providing them with real-time intelligence about enemy positions and the tactical situation on the ground. Her bird's-eye view of the battlefield allowed her to guide the SEALs along routes that avoided remaining enemy positions while identifying threats that ground personnel could not detect. Hayes established communication with the incoming extraction aircraft despite his wounds, providing them with landing zone information and security requirements. The communication specialist's professionalism under fire exemplified the standards that had earned him his place on the Special Operations team. His ability to coordinate multiple radio networks simultaneously proved critical in orchestrating the complex extraction operation that required precise timing and coordination. Morrison's wounds limited his mobility, but he continued performing his duties as the team's demolitions expert by preparing charges that could eliminate sensitive equipment if they were forced to abandon their position. His dedication to mission security despite his injuries demonstrated the commitment that characterized Special Operations personnel. Thompson and Santos assisted Morrison's movement while maintaining their defensive capabilities, in case enemy forces attempted to interfere with their extraction. Mitchell's ammunition supply was running low after multiple attack runs, but she continued providing close air support while coordinating with additional aircraft that were approaching the area. Her fuel situation also demanded consideration, as extended combat maneuvering had consumed her reserves at an accelerated rate. The pilot faced the difficult decision of when to depart for refueling versus remaining on station to provide continued support for the ground team. The extraction helicopters approached under Mitchell's protective cover, with their crews prepared for immediate departure once the SEAL team reached the landing zone. The helicopter pilots had reviewed Mitchell's tactical assessments and understood the continued threats posed by remaining enemy forces in the area. Their approach required precise timing to minimize exposure to ground fire while providing adequate time for loading wounded personnel. Taliban forces made one final attempt to prevent the American extraction, launching coordinated attacks against both the helicopters and the moving SEAL team. Mitchell engaged these threats with her remaining ammunition, while the helicopter door gunners provided suppressive fire that discouraged enemy interference with the loading operation. The sound of multiple aircraft weapons systems created a devastating barrage that overwhelmed the remaining Taliban fighters. Rodriguez was the last member of his team to board the extraction helicopter, maintaining security while his wounded teammates were loaded aboard. His leadership during the crisis had kept his team together through their most challenging engagement, and his tactical decisions had maximized their chances for survival until air support could arrive. The staff sergeant took one final look at the battlefield before boarding the aircraft that would carry them to safety. Mitchell conducted a final attack run to discourage enemy pursuit of the departing helicopters, expending her last ammunition against Taliban positions before departing the area herself. Her fuel gauges indicated that she had enough reserves to reach the nearest friendly airfield, but the margins were uncomfortably thin after her extended combat operations. The pilot's courage and skill had saved 6 American lives while demonstrating the capabilities that made the A-10 aircraft so valuable in close air support missions. Hayes and Morrison received immediate medical attention aboard the extraction helicopter, with flight medics stabilizing their wounds during the flight to the nearest military hospital. Both wounded SEALs would require surgery, but their prognosis remained positive thanks to Santos's field treatment and the rapid evacuation that Mitchell's intervention had made possible. The bonds forged between aircrew and ground personnel during combat operations created relationships that lasted throughout their military careers. Thompson reflected on the engagement during their flight to safety, recognizing that they had survived one of the most challenging situations any special operations team could face. The sniper's accurate fire had been critical during the early phases of the engagement, but Mitchell's intervention had ultimately saved their lives when their tactical situation became hopeless. His respect for the pilot's skills and courage would influence his approach to joint operations throughout the remainder of his career. Santos compiled his medical reports while monitoring Hayes and Morrison during their evacuation flight. The corpsman's field treatment had undoubtedly saved both men's lives, and his performance under fire demonstrated the critical importance of combat medical training for special operations personnel. His experiences during this engagement would inform his approach to medical training and equipment selection for future missions. Park analyzed the intelligence they had gathered during their surveillance mission, recognizing that their sacrifice had not been in vain, despite the tactical defeat they had suffered. The communications intercepts and tactical observations he had recorded would provide valuable information for future operations against Taliban leadership. His linguistic skills and cultural knowledge had contributed to the team's survival by providing early warning of enemy intentions. Morrison's wounds would require several months of rehabilitation, but his determination to return to operational status reflected the warrior spirit that characterized special operations personnel. The young sailor's performance under fire had proven his worthiness for inclusion in the elite unit. and his experiences would make him a more effective operator in future missions. His respect for Mitchell's life-saving intervention would influence his approach to joint operations throughout his career. Rodriguez submitted his after-action report with recommendations for improving intelligence collection and coordination procedures that could prevent similar situations in the future. The staff sergeant's leadership during the crisis had exemplified the standards expected of special operations personnel, but he recognized that tactical success often depended on factors beyond their control. His professional relationship with Mitchell would continue long after this engagement, as mutual respect between ground and air personnel formed the foundation for effective joint operations. Captain Mitchell returned to her base with a deeper understanding of the life and death responsibilities that came with close air support missions. Her precision flying and accurate gunnery had saved 6 American lives, while demonstrating the continued relevance of the A-10 aircraft in modern warfare. The pilot's courage and skill during the engagement earned her recognition throughout the special operations community, but she remained focused on preparing for the next mission that would demand similar performance under pressure. The Mountain Valley returned to its normal quiet as military personnel on both sides departed the area, but the engagement had demonstrated the ongoing challenges faced by American forces operating in Afghanistan. The tactical lessons learned by all participants would influence their approach to future operations, while the bonds forged during combat would endure long after the war ended. Mitchell's intervention had not only saved 6 lives, but had also reinforced the critical importance of coordination between ground and air forces in modern military operations.